Welcome to Insights for IT Negotiations, a podcast by UpperEdge, a leading IT sourcing, negotiation, and project execution advisory firm. I'm John Belden, UpperEdge's Chief Research and Strategy Officer.
And I'm Kylie Chisholm, UpperEdge's Marketing Manager. Join us every other week as we share insights to help you maximize the value of your key IT relationships. In each episode, we'll delve into the topics that matter most to IT decision makers and sourcing professionals. Hello, hi John, how are you?
I'm doing great, Kylie. How are you today?
I am doing good. We have a really interesting episode ahead. I'm excited to delve into sort of a past topic that we have talked about. We did an episode under the Sourcing Enterprise AI podcast on generative AI's impact on ERP implementations a couple of months back towards the beginning of 2024. And we were really forecasting what we expected to see throughout this year, because as we know, this is the year of generative AI. It's absolutely everywhere. It's being leveraged. It's being used. And now that we are over halfway through 2024, we wanted to take some time to revisit those predictions and see what's coming true, what's coming to fruition, what is maybe taking a different path than we expected. So I'm really excited to dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm gonna be able to test my my forecasting abilities right here, because you're gonna call me out on this is what you said, and then I'm gonna have to be forced to say, well, did it come true or did it not come true, right? Or may it still come true?
Yeah, exactly. So I guess to just kick us right off, I'll lay the groundwork of how we're going to sort of navigate these. So if you did listen to the previous episode, you can sort of follow along in that sense. But even if you haven't listened, you get an idea of what we talked about and can add on to that learning from there. So we originally lumped this into 4 different categories: environmental, SI delivery model, technology enablement, and implementation methods. And from those 4 categories, there were sort of different predictions within them. So I'm just going to take it category by category. I'll read through the high level. Here's sort of the prediction that you made involving that category. And then you can start to tell us, what we're seeing currently and how that prediction may change. So starting in with environmental, this was the lawsuits, litigation, and legislation category of the episode. So the first prediction was lawsuits and litigation will spike in 2024 as content authors revolt, and cost to train LLMs, those large language models, will increase as content license costs spike. And then the second was legislation will be introduced to protect privacy, IP, jobs, and national security. And there will be a slow rollout and protection of the incumbents. So that is the first sort of bucket. So tell us what you're seeing in the market.
All right, so we'll take these. At least I've got a few things that are going through my head. Well, let's go through this lawsuit point first. We're definitely seeing the lawsuits related to Gen AI, and primarily in the area of what I'm going to refer to as copyright infringement. Okay, there's 4 of them that I think are of interest. There's one I think we may have talked about in the episode previously. New York Times is suing Microsoft and OpenAI, right? That was kind of the big one that was out there. Since that time, Getty Images is suing Stability AI because Stability AI used 12 million, I'll call it, images from Getty Images to create their LLM. We've got the Authors Guild that has 17 authors that are suing OpenAI, and those 17 authors include John Grisham as well as George R.R. Martin. So we're not talking about, 17 unknown authors. We're talking about the big hitters out there. And we've got Universal Music suing Anthropic for copyright infringement. So we got images, we got music, we got test, right? We got all of them out there that have got their lawsuits out there to test the courts. I think what's most interesting that's coming from those lawsuits isn't so much the lawsuit itself as much as it's beginning to set the standard for I'm gonna refer to it as settlements, right? So the companies like OpenAI are now paying other organizations for their content. Now, there's not a lot of information that's out there about how much they're paying, but I do have some, I'll call it, I do have some information that shows Reddit signed an agreement for $60 million. And I think it was with OpenAI in order to be able
Mhm.
to sell the Reddit content. So anything that you may have posted on Reddit is probably now going to get sucked into OpenAI. I am seeing information that news organizations, so let's say like um, I'm thinking about other newspapers, the Financial Times as an example, uh,
Mhm.
just signed an agreement where their content is being sold from anywhere between $1 million to $5 million a year to these companies and these LLMs. And it really does make sense that they have to sell that content because they're blocking the content. If they don't have access to the content, the LLMs, they're not going to be able to keep their models up to date, right? So,
Yeah.
there is an avenue out there for these content creators, I'll call it, to make money. And I think
Yeah.
ultimately that's what's going to happen on the Getty Images and the Authors Guild is they're going to make their money, right?
Yeah.
But I think these lawsuits are going to more than anything shake out what the value is of the actual content itself, because that's a hard thing to get your hands around. So those lawsuits are absolutely taking place. The other lawsuit, which to me is probably the most interesting lawsuit, is one that just came, that just moved forward with some um, in the judicial system. And this one is Mobley versus Workday. Okay, now you say, what the heck is Mobley versus Workday? Um, Mr. Mobley sued Workday under the guise of the Workday software is biased and discriminatory.
Mhm.
And the his foundation for this lawsuit is this. He said that he applied for more than 200 jobs that he was qualified for, right? That he was qualified for. And he got rejected by all um, for all 200 jobs. And each one of those companies was using the Workday software. And he was receiving, in certain cases, the rejections of those jobs during the middle of the night. So his interpretation was it was the software that was doing the rejection, right, versus the company that actually owned the software doing the rejection. And so the argument that he's making is that the Workday software, the AI component of the Workday software that's making the selection, is actually biased. And so he's suing Workday, right, versus suing those each company for discriminatory, because he can't really make a case on a company by company basis, but he can make a case against Workday that says, how can I be rejected from 200 companies when I'm clearly qualified, right? So it is really an interesting lawsuit to say the software companies are being, to a certain extent, exposed based upon the LLMs that they are created to drive the
Mhm.
software product itself.
Interesting. Yeah, that's fascinating. It's very pressing at this point too, looking into. I feel like a lot of companies put into place like blind resume initiatives, but it's like, what do you do when the software that you're using for those are being discriminatory because the AI
Exactly.
is not smart enough to, or is,
Exactly, right? So
programmed that way.
it is opening up, at least for me, kind of a whole avenue of, I mean, and I hate to say it, I love a good lawsuit, okay? But from the standpoint of really saying this is um, a novel lawsuit. This is the first one that I've
Mhm.
seen of that type,
Yeah,
where you're really suing the software company itself for
yeah,
bias based upon the LLMs that they created for, uh,
yeah,
utilizing to be utilized within the algorithm itself.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
in the space of legislation, probably the most interesting thing is August 1st, the EU legislation actually goes into effect on,
Mhm.
protections and privacies associated with generative AI. the biggest impact's going to be on, I'll call it high risk, um, high risk applications. And high risk, means two different things. They define it as biometrics, education, law enforcement, right, where they're focused on kind of data quality and
Mhm.
biases. But for general use AI, there is general use being things like ChatGPT, et cetera, Gemini. There are
Mhm.
going to be requirements associated with those companies being transparent in, what was the content that was actually used in order to be able to train those LLMs. And then,
Yeah.
in the U.S. In April of 2024, the Biden administration kind of pushed out their executive order for the
Yeah.
federal government on use of AI and the requirements of use of AI. Lots of times, those executive orders or the frameworks that are developed by the government, oftentimes they translate into the corporate world on a going forward basis, where people say, hey, if it's good enough for the government, it's going to be good enough for me, so let's pick that up and let's start with that as a foundation. So the fact that they
Yeah.
put out those executive orders kind of to me is a precursor of things to come as well. So if i
Yeah.
if i looked at that, I'll call it forecast of what's going to happen in AI, I would check the box and say it's absolutely happening.
Very interesting. And I do want to go back really quick. What you mentioned about the Reddit and OpenAI deal. The first thing that I thought of was, I believe at Sapphire, they polled attendees, and their number one concern was data privacy when it
Hmm.
comes to AI. And, of course, we've seen data privacy concerns on an individual level. And I think the Reddit case is like a prime example of that. But it very much carries over company wide. And we've talked about this before on the podcast, that trust. And I know SAP didn't do the best job. And by that, I mean they didn't respond at all to those concerns. But at some point, they're going to be backed into a corner. Them and the other
Right.
software vendors are going to be backed into a corner of figuring out how to protect and articulate that protection to their customers in order to get buy-in.
Well, right. And also being able to actually demonstrate that, okay, you're selling the stuff, but how do I know that you're not selling my private stuff? Now, certainly
Exactly.
there's a way that Reddit can just say, hey, listen, all we've done is we've extracted the conversation and we've taken away the actual people that had said certain things. And I'm sure that's part of their deal.
Yeah.
But it obviously brings up the what did you sell about me?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, that's really fascinating. I feel like I could talk about the lawsuit side of it all forever, but I'll move on to our next category, and that is the SI delivery model. So we have three predictions from this category. So I'll take them one at a time and have you respond
Okay.
that way. So the first was ERP implementation services will become more commoditized and less risky, with firms differentiating themselves by reducing client demand, implementation cost reduction, and risk absorption. So can you talk a little bit about what we're seeing there?
Yeah, I would say this one is check the box on this one, but probably not as fast as we would have expected. Um,
Okay.
when we work with clients and we assist our clients, I'll call it going out to RFP. One of the things that we always do is to query the vendors to be able to say, okay, what efficiencies are you actually getting from generative AI? What do you expect to get out of generative AI? In general, what we're seeing is the vendors today, and by vendors, I'm going to refer to Accenture, IBM, Deloitte, et cetera, right, PwC. Um,
Hmm.
they are obtaining efficiencies from generative AI, and I'm going to say in two dimensions. Dimension one is everyday AI. So, them using the tools like GitHub, Microsoft Copilot, the tools that are available to everybody on generative AI, they're getting efficiencies there. And I think they're also getting efficiencies in the capturing of their own internal knowledge base for querying.
Hmm.
Specifically, EY and I think PwC are doing a really good job of going out and advertising of we captured our knowledge base, right? So I think in that area, we're definitely seeing some productivity gains. What we're not seeing yet is generative AI actually embedded into the assets of the various firms, right? It's not,
Mhm.
I'll call it curated into Deloitte's Ascend methodology yet, and it's not curated into um, Accenture's My Concerto to the point that they're running out and talking about the benefits that they're getting out of generative AI embedded into those tools.
Mhm.
Having said that, right, they are definitely future selling. The capabilities will be embedded in those tools, and I
Mhm.
expect that we're going to see those benefits. I'm going to say in another 5 to 10, 5 to let's call it 5 to 10 months, probably aligned with the rollout of the next generation of LLMs. So maybe think about Chat GPT 5, right? Because I think
Okay.
there's a lot of hesitancy there for them to actually roll these tools out because of the problems that still exist with, I'll call it, with the Chat GPT 4, and that being the
Mhm.
underpinnings, those LLMs being the underpinnings of the actual products themselves.
Well, 5 to 10 months, that means that we'll see you guys in 5 to 10 months and we'll be discussing whether that came true. So for the next prediction in the SI delivery model category, you had software firms will further expand implementation offerings with the ability to absorb risk in software agreements.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the SAP Sapphire. I mean, SAP's announcement of Joule is kind of
Mm-hmm.
right in line with what we're talking about there, right? Where they're,
Yeah.
again, SAP's doing a little bit of future selling in this space in terms of what Joule is going to be capable of. But it's essentially a sidecar for both the users of SAP as well as the implementers of SAP. And I think the concept is great. I think it probably works better than maybe
Mm-hmm.
it's being advertised. Um, but I also think that there's a real reluctance by SAP to go out and market that really hard
Yeah.
because it's going to bite the hand of their ecosystem, right? If SAP comes up with a product that is going to reduce the implementation cost of SAP by 20%, right?
Mm-hmm.
That 20% not coming out of SAP's pocket. That
Yeah.
20% is coming out of their partners. It's coming out of Accenture. It's coming out of IBM. It's coming out of PwC, right? So
Mm-hmm.
aggressively rolling that out would be punching your supplier in the face or your partner in the face. And so I think there's a kind of a reluctance to do that. Having said that, right, eventually the market's going to drive that product out to the point where people are going to be using it as a part of their regular methodologies, and everybody else is going to have to fall in line. But I think right now, I think there's a real reluctance, I'll call it, to push that product because they don't want to, I'll call it, poke the bear of like an Accenture.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. And I should also mention, because SAP is being tied to a lot of these predictions, I think we have a ton of resources from SAP
Right.
Sapphire. So if you want to dig into any of those specifically, especially the Joule announcement, we have some content around that. So I'll make sure to put that in the description of this episode. Because, yeah, it's very much entwined with what we're seeing as far as generative AI and ERP for sure. And then the last prediction in SI delivery model was that tier one system integrators will focus on ERP enabled generative AI delivery, bringing differentiated methods, tools, talent, and industry specific trained LLMs.
Yeah, this was. I thought about this one prior to our episode, and I can't honestly say yet um, that we've seen this come out. But I did want to convey something that I thought was uh, actually I thought it was kind of comical. Um, we definitely could tell that the systems integrators are utilizing generative AI in the preparation of their proposals to
Mm-hmm.
clients. And where this became really really clear was we're working with uh, a large client that's in the airline industry. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and they're going through um, what would be considered to be a phase zero for the upgrade of their ECC platform to an S4 platform. And we had all the major players in there. We had Accenture, we had PwC, we had IBM, we had Deloitte, right? And I think it may have been TCS or Infosys that was involved as well, but we had all the big guys. And Three out of the six presenters, when they made their proposals to this client, constructed their proposals in such a way to fully utilize airline terminology in the conveyance of their methodology, right? So everything was kind of being aligned with airline terms, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
getting ready for takeoff, having a safe landing, in flight, adjustments, everything was kind of aligned with that airline terminology. And you knew darn well that what they did, right, is they took their presentation, they went to
Mm-hmm.
Chat GPT, they said, hey, can you update this presentation to make it aligned with the terminology in the airline industry? And it was
Mm-hmm.
almost like I was looking at the same presentation from all three vendors, because they had all tried to apply the same technique to
Yeah.
make their proposal look like, right, it was aligned with the way the customer was thinking. I just, I kind of wanted to convey it as a little bit comical, right, that in
Yeah.
this case the application of Gen AI made them look the same. It didn't
Yeah.
differentiate them.
Yeah. That's well, and I think of you actually said this in an internal meeting we had where AI can make you look really, really smart. It can also make you look really, really stupid. And I wouldn't go so far as to say that it made them look stupid, but it was one of those moments where they probably went in thinking this is going to give us a little upper hand, and it really didn't give them
No, it
anything.
made them look like everybody else.
Yeah, and it made it even more obvious that they all likely used that same technique of
Exactly.
leveraging
Exactly. Right. That
ChatGPT.
which is, like I said, I thought it was unique. I thought it was interesting. And this wasn't, these weren't small companies, right? These were the big guys.
Yeah,
These
yeah.
were the big guys that were playing for big dollars with the big company. And I just, like I said, I just found it a little bit comical when you look at it. You go, hmm.
All right, so before we get into our next category, we are going to take a quick pause for a commercial break, but then we'll be back to discuss. Did you know that UpperEdge offers subscription advisory services? This on demand solution provides essential benchmarks and market insights specific to your business needs precisely when you need it, empowering you and your team to make informed decisions for your IT initiatives. Position your team for success. Reach out today via the link in the show notes to learn more. Okay, so getting into our next category, that's the technology enablement category. So the first prediction that you had here was that vendor and technology alignment will become more complex as competitive landscape shifts and accountability seems to become blurry.
Mm-hmm. Um, so in this case, I will say that this has sorted itself out a lot faster than what I thought it was going to sort itself out.
Interesting.
If we kind of look at the major vendors in generative AI, I'll call it infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
There's, I mean, you can probably put six companies in this category to start off with. Let's call it Google, Metal, Microsoft, Amazon, NVIDIA, and OpenAI. Those are the
Mm-hmm.
companies that largely can create large language models and sell infrastructure. And if you
Mm-hmm.
look at that list of six, there's two that are dominating from a sales perspective, and that's Microsoft and Amazon. And if you look at, I'll call it the CIO surveys that exist out there, most CIOs in large industries are, I'll call it, bending toward the Microsoft space. But if you're
Mm-hmm.
going into the negotiations and you're thinking about buying the platform to support generative AI for your organization, the two companies you're going to bring into every negotiation for me is going to be Microsoft and Amazon,
Mm-hmm.
just as a starter. And I think that's really kind of sorted itself out. Now, other companies that will always get into the discussion now, IBM with its Watson will be there. ServiceNow with Einstein will be there. Anthropic will be there, just based upon their, I'll call it, their focus on safety and security. But by and large, I think this whole area has sorted itself out a lot quicker than what I thought it was going to sort out.
Mm-hmm.
What I think has changed, though, is the scope of what I'm going to define as a phase zero now for a company. Typically, what we've seen is when companies have had to take on a major IT initiative, it was kind of focused in one area. It was my back office, it was my CRM, it was, I'm going to do something on the shop floor. This generative AI introduction has forced companies, and the boards are kind of telling the CIOs, hey, listen, you've got to take a wide swatch of our company and find out where are the benefits of generative AI going to be, right? And it's forcing companies to kind of think about their architecture holistically, right? Not just a component of it, meaning they're having to bring all of these companies into the mix when they're doing their architecting work, uh, which I should have thought about that before, but now once hindsight's 2020. That should have been the prediction, right? The prediction should have been there's going to be phase zeros are going to evolve into a broader infrastructure,
Yeah.
in the discussion on the infrastructure, and I think, or discussion on the environment, right? And to me, that's what's happening right now is
Mhm.
the broader discussion on the entire architecture is taking place. And I think that's one of the things that's actually slowed down the overall industry. If you want to think about the systems integrator industry, is this broader discussion is taking place across the entire industry. And there's a lot of people going, well, wait a second. We got to take some time to figure out where we're going to put our money.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, isn't that what keeps us on our toes with our jobs, John? Is that we can never really nail down what the prediction should
Yeah,
be.
no, but we have one. We'll always have a view
Yes.
of what
But
we'll
we'll
always
always
have a
have.
view of what the future is, because you got to have some view of the future in order to be able to make really decent decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Very well put. And then the next prediction in the technology enablement category was enterprises will seek assistance from SIs to
Yeah,
establish generative AI organizations and capabilities with a portfolio of projects supported by the SI.
yeah, and I think I think we're seeing that. I
Mm-hmm.
think just part of the evidence of that would be Accenture in general. Let's just take Accenture's earnings as an example.
Mm-hmm.
If we go back and look at um, if we go look at Accenture's earnings in the first quarter, 3% of their earnings were based upon generative AI. If you look at their earnings in the second quarter, 6% of their earnings are based upon generative AI. So clearly there's some traction there
Yeah.
associated with it. Now, they're not, all of these big SIs are not giving out a huge amount of information in terms of what's happening, but clearly we can see the traction in general on
Yeah.
generative AI taking place at these big firms. Now we're also seeing the impact of generative AI because the rest of their business isn't growing, but clearly
Yeah.
we're seeing Accenture make, in particular, based upon what they're releasing, inroads in this area. So I think
Yeah.
that's definitely happening. Where people are still depending on the SIs to go out and assist them kind of with this architecture work.
Yeah. Yeah. And this one's interesting in the sense of we can really keep track of it quarter after quarter after quarter and see how it continues to
Exactly.
evolve and grow. Um, All right, so moving into our last category, I'm just going to go ahead and read off the predictions that you had
Sure.
for implementation methods because I know we may want to dive a bit deeper into this in a future episode.
Yep.
So we'll go over these. You can paint some broad brushstrokes for people. So the first one was that waterfall methodology will be washed away by agile,
Mhm.
and then high degrees of automation on development, tests, and data will put OCM on the critical path.
Yeah. So on the first one, I'm going to say still too soon to tell.
Mm-hmm.
If we circle back to kind of the whole discussion of the SIs embedding generative AI into their specific assets,
Mm-hmm.
that last point probably is not going to take place until it's actually embedded into the asset, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to say, hold on that one right now for another 5 to 10 months before we actually can see the overall impact on it. As it relates to the OCM, we are definitely seeing generative AI actually be applied to OCM. We got some interesting language from one of the vendors, specifically stating that we are going to be using generative AI in the OCM area and the creation of materials for training. And we are not liable for any copyright infringement that might occur as a result of that. So obviously they're trying to protect themselves, and they're saying to the client, you bear the risk on this, not
Yeah.
us that bears the risk on it. I still think, again, that the OCM is ultimately going to be on the critical path. I just don't think we're there yet until we get this full automation of the other areas. So, as you mentioned, we definitely want to get Sam Baya and some of the members of his team on here to talk in general about what they're actually seeing in terms of the implementation of generative AI embedded in those processes. But I would say, by and large, I'm not going to sit here and look at those predictions and say we should throw them away. I'm going to say, yeah, they're probably deferred. It's probably not coming as fast as I thought it was going to.
Yeah, interesting. And it'll definitely be good to dive deep a bit because I'm very interested to hear what Sam and his team have to say as they've been in the thick of it all. But those are our predictions. I always say, I feel like at the end of these episodes, selfishly, I'm always glad to have these episodes because I find these conversations fascinating. Hopefully our listeners agree. And also, if you watched the video version of this, you will have seen that we had a slide up to help you sort of map out the predictions that we are talking about. So if you're listening on the audio version, go ahead and pop over to the video so that you can see that and get a visual for everything that we discussed in this episode. But with that, thank you, John, and thank you everyone for listening.